Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are. This is John Baptiste of the Red Pill Religion / Escaping Atheism Project, and I'm here with one of my cohorts, Mr. Brass, who is, part of our Facebook group. Say hi, Mr. Brass.
Hi, everyone. Glad to be on.
Well, Mr. Brass is a deist. Would you be interested in explaining deism? You don't have to do it simply. We're not on a time limit.
Oh, I prefer to keep things simple. So, in order to not really, so the audience can know, um, a deist, I would say, is someone that recognizes that there is an external creative force behind the universe. We call this external force God. Is that, I would say that's a pretty simple, definition, that we can go with. I mean, obviously, different deists have different ways of explaining these, but if I were to gather around a table with a bunch of them, we could all pretty much agree that this is like the simplest way to think of it. Um,
Well, that goes in line with Judaism and Christianity too. Um, it's something that deists can sit down with those two groups and actually have a common
mhm.
commonality. Um, so deism obviously is an umbrella like theism is. Um,
Well, I mean,
what kind of deist are you?
I would say that, I mean, I would basically put myself as just, I simply say I'm just deist. I mean, there's different branches of it, but I kind of take like what, and I've heard Christian YouTubers that I've checked out, like Inspiring Philosophy. He says he likes to be just called just a Christian. Well, I mean, I just like to call myself just a deist because I think once you apply so many different labels, it becomes confusing to the audience. I would say I'm more inclined to be one of the natural deists, like a classical one. Um, but you know, I always say that I always hold out, for whatever guides me in my philosophy, in my readings.
So, a classical deist would be the likes of Voltaire, of uh Voltaire is the
Thomas
only one
Paine.
that comes to mind. Who? I'm sorry.
Thomas Paine. Um,
Thomas Paine was a deist? I thought he was an atheist.
no, he was a deist. In fact, if you read Age of Reason, he actually calls out atheists on there as fools.
Oh, really? I
Oh
have to
yeah.
I have to reread The Age of Reason then. I'll
I
probably.
mean, that's what got me in. Like, I know you're probably going to ask about my deism and how I came to this to hold the belief. Um, it was like, the likes of reading guys like Voltaire, Thomas Paine, Thomas Jefferson, the Jefferson Bible. Reading those people, got me into it. It got me intrigued. Um,
Yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm trying to tweet out on and everything. But
that's fine.
okay. All right. So you know you mentioned the Jefferson Bible, which is one of the things that I think should be required for any young man or woman. Um, yeah,
Hmm.
I've read it several times during you know um, school when I was in public education down in Florida. Sometimes it was required. Sometimes I just went back to it because it was just I liked it. I liked that it was this was it was Thomas Jefferson making a statement, which he purposefully wasn't forthright about what he believed. There's some things that he says that that atheists say, well, he was obviously clearly an atheist. And then there's other actions and things that he did that makes Christians go, clearly he was a Christian. And then and so on and so forth. I think he
He
did
was a
that.
very complicated man, you could
Yeah.
say.
Yeah, but I think he did that more on purpose, so not one group can take the Constitution and everything that he wrote and claim it for their own. He wanted to be, this is me, this is my thoughts, and they were good thoughts, I think.
Well, there's also another thing. It's about history and when Thomas Jefferson was around. Back in his time, I mean, he hung out with atheists. He was not openly against them or nothing. Um, he actually, in fact, said that it didn't bother him at all if someone was an atheist. Um, he, um, he was like from where he was around. There was a lot of Christian deists, you could say. There were people that they believed that the Bible was, a great moral teacher, but they didn't believe that God intervened and stuff like that. That was the kind back then. And when you have people like that, you'll hear them making quotes about Jesus Christ and the Creator God, and that would sound awfully Christian because they're taking they're saying that these things are inspirational. I mean, it would be kind of like, in a way, me quoting Richard Dawkins in The God Delusion, which I don't really recommend people reading, but um, it's like if I were to quote from him and I just said, well, this book contains, this sort of moral statement, you could easily come to the conclusion that I'm an atheist, even if I'm not.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's God Delusion is a weird, weird book.
It's, I call it, it's, to me, it's like intellectually dull. I mean, Richard Dawkins is a biologist. He is not a philosopher, as many people have pointed out. And to his credit, he never claimed to be one. But at the same time, he made a bunch of philosophical statements which he could not back up. Um, you know, I would consider it somewhat like if a young Earth creationist or something started making biology terms, even though they may have not claimed to be a biologist, they're still going outside their range of field. If that makes sense at all.
Yeah, that does make sense. Well, all right. So, what are some common misconceptions about theism? Because I can list off a few that I see atheists doing. Like, atheists will claim that deism is a form of theism because of the belief in God, which that's them narrowing the definition of theism. Like me, I'm if I was to actually, like any genre of the Enlightenment period, 18th 18th century, early 19th century, it would have to be the supernatural, rational supernaturalism. John Locke, Rene
Yeah.
Descartes, those type of people that actually made pretty good arguments for you know um, religion.
Oh yeah. They.
There some
I
deists.
like them.
There are some deists in there. I mean,
You
what's your thoughts on all that?
Well, I mean, I study history. I kind of, I'm really into studying the culture of things. I always find that, fascinating. I really started in the Enlightenment era. It got me thinking about deism because that was a very widely thing back then. There was more deists probably then than there is now. Um, and I would say the common misconception, I mean, for one, deism is theism. Um, Theism is like, as William Lane Craig said, it's the broad view that God exists. Deism it's the belief that God exists. While deism, is a category of that. You know, it falls under theism, but it comes down to, has God revealed himself? Um, which, as you know, a deist, well, I mean, you also have to define reveal because there's many thousands of different definitions you can get for reveal.
Well,
You know,
we can use the Enlightenment era definitions. I mean that's what I'm using for deism anyway. Because
yeah,
they split up theism and deism, as theism being the belief in God, but believing that God actually gives divine revelations, and then deism
yeah.
be you
Well, I
know
mean, yeah, there's I imagine like, over time that there has been some, words change over time and categories get switched around. Um I would say like a a common misconception, I would say, it kind of comes from both sides. I've known that, as Rich, I don't like bringing up Richard Dawkins again, but I hear this a lot from atheists that deism is pretty much, just watered down theism, while Christians would say that it's, just wanting to be a Christian without having the doctrines,
I mean
something like that.
I obviously disagree with both interpretations, because it's like, really, you're gonna go that far? Because it's you don't have ritualistic practices, to my knowledge, unless that's changed.
Um,
But unless that's changed, I mean, you could be a Gnostic esoteric person.
um,
There are deists that do that. Oh, go ahead.
yeah. Well, I mean, of course, like with any group, there are differences amongst peoples and their activities. I go to a Unitarian Universalist church myself on occasions. Um, I like the wide variety of views that they allow there. Um, they have many groups of people that I find comforting, and they encourage thinking, reading into these things. And, I've always just been interested in that, and that's how I got into it. Uh, I've also, it's just a bad misrepresentation because, from when I don't know what really bothers me more because I can kind of see, like, a lot of Christians I personally know are pretty much deist. They are deist in the sense, like, they're not really, like, church going. They don't really know the Bible at all, but they have a basic view of God.
Well, uh,
But they just tie that into Jesus.
yeah. I mean, I have I have I've noticed that there's a lot of Christians like that. It's not that it's anything bad. It's just
Oh, it's
as
not bad
as,
at all.
as far as not knowing the Bible. Well, I'm
Yeah,
not really that big on biblical literal that I can type it, but I can't say it. Literal
literalism.
reading the Bible literally. I don't agree
Oh,
with
that's
that.
stupid. Is to do with any ancient text.
Well,
You have to, you have to put it. You have to, I mean, not stupid per se, you know, but you always have to keep in mind that these things were like with any historical document. You have to, like, see how it was written back to those people and put because I studied the Bible and especially the Old Testament because I find it fascinating. Um, there's a lot of things you lose if you take it that route because and you get such a more richer outlook when you do see it. From the standpoint of the people that live there, because you get this cultural feel towards it, if that makes sense.
oh yeah, that totally makes sense. Me, I go to Jewish synagogue every once in a while. They allow it. It's they allow the different faiths to come in, and practice with them. You can go through the liturgy and stuff like that. You go through like Judaism 101,
Mm-hmm.
all the steps to go through that, and learning biblical literal not biblical literal biblical Hebrew. It kind of shifted my perception on at least the Old Testament, because it was written to be music. It was written to be musical. Certain dots would mean certain inflections, like certain dots and dashes would mean you trill your voice while you're doing it, and that changes the meaning. The trills, the different pitches of how you're supposed to do it. That all changes the meaning of the sound and of the word. It's a very primal. Um, it wells up some pretty primal feelings, and when you hear it's also the same with biblical Greek. I'm bad Greek Orthodox because I forgot the the official name of it, but it works in pretty much the same way. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
I mean, like I was saying, not, you know, it's not, I wouldn't say it's stupid, but I think, people that do take the literalistic approach to it are missing out on history, which I find is a sorely lacking thing these days because, I'm a big history fan. I'm a history buff. I study culture. I study philosophy. I delve deeply into these matters of people. Um, so when I read something like the old, if I mean, well, to get a little funny side to you, I was actually originally a non-denominational Christian for the first 18 years of my life. Um, Later on, I read some I read, some science literature. I read into neuroscience. I read some philosophy. I read the likes of Voltaire. I read Thomas Paine's work, you know, and I just, I kept going deeper and deeper, and I had philosophical issues. And going into the history, learning some of the Hebrew, learning some of the Greek, I just came more to identify more with the deist position. I was never really, I would say, real religious. It hardly ever came up. But, I always had a basic view of God. And I just found that later on in life, when, after I turned around 18 and 19 and continuing my studies, I found that deism just made more sense for me from what I was experiencing.
And I would say that's perfectly fine. I mean, I would say that it's what how the atheists put it. Like when you talk about God, it's like, which God? There's only one God we're talking about here. It's just seen in multiple different ways. There's
Yeah,
multiple different explanations for you know the being, the you know ultimately the mind that is outside of everything, that is.
yeah. Well, I mean, like that's the whole 4,000 gods argument, which is stupid. You know, for like the 4,000 gods argument. Basically, if I could go saying there is 4,000 gods, you only believe in one of those gods. Therefore, what is the probability that your God is right? Well, the problem with that argument is it makes a huge presuppositional fallacy. It presupposes that all these gods are equal in evidence or that they're equal in merit. Like, when you go back in ancient literature, you find that there's specific gods that are very material beings, that you should see them in nature, and there's plenty of specific gods where they have to lie within a certain physical constraint in order for them to rationally make sense. So I mean, it And for another thing, it's like even taking away the philosophical issues with that, it's a blunder in of itself because there's been millions of interpretations of God. If you count polytheist, if you count like all the gods in Hinduism alone, you come to startling millions of gods that people have worshipped. So I mean, it's factually wrong on its front, and it presupposes that the evidence for all these gods is equal when it really isn't. There's specific gods that are material beings that that they live in the natural world that we have to investigate. So I mean, we can rule out those gods. Um,
Well,
so I mean,
you
well,
mean
we can rule them out. We
can
can rule them out with a good.
we really
We can.
rule out demigods though? I mean, because that's what you're talking about. I mean, because it's
Well,
if it's a human being with godlike powers, right? You would think
yeah,
that that human
there's
being
multiple
would
different
be,
ways.
well, but you would assume that that human being would be able to hide himself or herself from
Yeah, I
human.
mean, if you think about the numbers of like, you have like you've had like, hundreds of thousands at least, or even more of demigods. You think, one of them eventually of different belief systems, some that were very open to discussing these things. You would think one would, at least by accident, would stop a car with his bare hands or something, or would get hit by a car, but would just stay there.
Well,
Like you see.
I would think that they would still get hurt and stuff. It's just they would heal
Well,
a lot faster, and things that would actually normally kill a human, it just wouldn't.
work for them. I mean,
Yeah.
well, take Hercules for example. That he was a demigod. Um, Hercules, basically was even supposedly stronger than the gods. The only difference really between a demigod and the regular gods came down to birthrights. Um, if you were born, basically you'd have to be a bastard child in order to be a demigod. Like with Zeus and his number of bastard children, which I could be all day listing them. Zeus got around a lot, apparently, from my readings.
They all
Like with,
technically got around a lot. I mean,
yeah. Well, I mean, what's funny is if you actually read it, Hephaestus, I never got the story of Hephaestus. He made all the armor and he was their armor guy. What I've always found funny is like in any literature you read of Hephaestus, like he's apparently this guy that can make weapons that stop the gods. Like he stopped Ares. Like he caught him in a net when he caught Ares cheating on his. We caught Ares and his wife in an affair. So he apparently has this divine power to be able to do other gods like that. And throughout all literature, he's treated like garbage. His Zeus and Hera pretty much disowned him, throwing him out of Olympus. They, you know, all the gods pretty much treat him like a joke. But he has this power. You think in some story that he'd be higher up. I don't know. I just always found it fascinating looking into these things.
yeah. I mean, with Greek mythology, it just seems all different, little gods, the ones that actually, sided with the humans, always got treated like garbage. Because I think Hephaestus was one of the gods that actually would, after
He was
being
like
kicked, that
he
he
was a nice,
protected humans. I
yeah,
mean, he wasn't necessarily a nice guy, but he protected humans from the gods essentially.
danger. Yeah, I mean, he was. I believe in Greek mythology. I could be wrong on this, of course, but I believe he's actually the one that made human beings. Like Zeus didn't do that. Because him being the builder god, he built humans out of clay, or I've heard like from that. Um,
I'm not really
and
sure about that because I haven't really studied polytheism in forever.
well, I mean,
Not
well,
not
here's what's
Greek
funny. I've
poly.
always noticed. Here's what I've always funnily noticed. Like many people before me have noticed this too. But even with the polytheistic religions like Hinduism, or you know, like was Greek mythology or Roman mythology and all that, they all shared a common thing where they had one central god. Like how Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, they all had one central god. They just had God appointing people below him to different positions. So like was like for Zeus was at one point, like I believe in the end, like almost the end times of Greek mythology. After Zeus became sort of like the Christian god in a way, where they considered all the stories allegorical of him, and they considered him just this big guiding force. So I mean,
Well, yeah, that's where the term Deus comes from. um,
yeah,
but with polytheism, it they view the mythologies and the stories a little bit differently because it's based
yeah,
on oral tradition. Oral tradition, originally was a way to both entertain and teach. That's why
mm-hmm.
most of the Bible is allegorical because it
Yeah,
originated as oral stories passed down through the generations.
mm-hmm.
Same with Christianity too, because before the actual Bible was written, before the Old Testament and New Testament was written, it was
Mm-hmm.
all oral stories that over hundreds of years people would write down and
Mm-hmm.
collate it into this big. Jordan Peterson calls it the first hyperlinked book, which I really
Mm-hmm.
enjoy that because
Yeah.
it's so true.
Yeah, I like Jordan Peterson actually. He gets some bad rep by some atheists. I noticed guys like TMM, and some others. They rip into him, but I think my only problem is like he's too much of a thinker. He has like that one of the people that like I don't try to say like how they call it person that's too deep into their own thoughts. Jordan Peterson's always, trying to find a meaning behind everything. And to some people that rubs them the wrong way. I personally find him enjoyable. He comes across as very genuine and he comes across as very much wanting to know the truth behind these things.
Oh yes, absolutely. One of that's definitely a reason why I like Jordan Peterson because I kind of do the same thing, but he's actually professionally paid to find meaning, the meaning behind everything. But his whole entire professional career, it seems, with maps of meaning and
Mm-hmm.
all of his talks, including his debates with atheists on Toronto, the Toronto TV network, because
Mm-hmm.
during the whole New Atheism phase, when New Atheism climaxed, I
Mm-hmm.
call it climax point because it started in the 1960s with
Mm-hmm.
Anthony Flew, atheist
Yeah,
opposition, um, and then it
who
spun
became a
on
deist,
from
by
there.
the way.
Who? Oh, Anthony
Anthony
Flew.
Flew.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. He's one of the few atheists that I enjoyed reading, and then when he became a deist, is like that makes sense. I'm actually think Daniel Dennett is going to go from atheist to deist, relatively soon because I've been following his stuff with AI. He's mainly AI programming, and that's one of the scientific fields that I'm interested in because I'm a programmer of
Oh,
sorts.
neat.
It's a
Um,
hobby.
Funny. I never thought of Dennett would be the one that do that. Like, if out of all the four horsemen, I always thought like if anyone, funny enough, Sam Harris would be the one because Sam Harris is into the meditation. He's into the philosophies. He's into all if anyone was going to become a theist, or at least a theist in any way, I would assume it would have been Harris. But Dennett, I've always
Well,
seen Dennett as, no one really thinks about Dennett as much as the other horsemen. Like
well,
Hitchens
no,
was like
he's.
the most famous.
I'm sorry for talking above you,
It's fine.
but no, I mean Denon is the only actual philosopher, the only actual person. He had I think a minor in philosophy and a major in computer science, which
Yeah.
is a field that I'm interested in, specifically the AI problems that he's been coming across as
Yeah.
far as cognition and actually getting robots to see.
Mm-hmm.
Jordan Peterson actually talks about this, the frame
Mm-hmm.
problem. He talked about in one of his lectures, the frame problem being that they tried to get, you know, um, when they tried to get actual robots to see objects, and stuff like
Yeah.
that, they learned that they couldn't, and it's called the frame problem. That's actually Daniel Dennett's, you know, big, thing to fame is his work in AI and AI cognition and stuff like that.
I would say he's probably like, sorry I talk over too, but I would say Dennett is probably the most legitimate out of all of them, out of the Four Horsemen. He's not as widely known as Dawkins or Harris or Hitchens, especially not Hitchens. But I would say he's more legitimate as an academic than I would say the rest, especially Sam Harris. I despise him in so many ways.
Yeah, I mean, like you said, it seems like he would be atheist, but I think he just has, I think he just has too much invested in atheism. He makes
I
too much
think so
money.
too.
He makes too much money off of it for him to actually openly say he's a deist. Whereas, you know, with the work that Dennett is actually doing, with because the AI stuff he's doing is
Mhm.
actually helping, psychology out and
Yeah.
helping us actually understand cognition and stuff like that. And
Mhm.
he's been running into a lot of problems that it's just, it
Yeah.
that's just my opinion on actually, because I like to read a lot and I read
Yeah. So same
history.
here. I got a whole computer worth of it.
Yeah. I mean, I always found Dennett though to be the most easily readable
Mhm.
because it's there's not a lot of doublethink. Um,
Yeah.
and and
I
and
actually got his book Consciousness Explained. So far, it's a pretty interesting read.
yeah, yeah, it is. It's I enjoyed that book.
Mhm. He comes to conclusions that so a lot of philosophers pretty much laugh at. He believes that consciousness is ultimately an illusion, which you know to me personally, I say that I'm rather agnostic towards what consciousness is because there are so many ideas about what it is. Like legitimately, I've heard consciousness be described as everything, and I've described it being as nothing. So when that's your framework, you know that we have nothing. We know nothing about consciousness.
Well, yeah, because
On a,
you can't really study consciousness because we can't pinpoint where consciousness actually happens in the brain. We can see just before we make a decision what we call our subconscious actually makes there's some activity in the subconscious part of the brain just before you make a decision. But and
Mhm.
a lot of atheists go, well, that's proof that there's no free will. And it's like, no, that's proof that, consciousness exists outside of the human, outside of the tissue, in my opinion. You know, it,
It could also just prove that we have muscle fibers, and our muscles take a certain time. There's been multiple criticisms of that. I know what you're referencing is the Libet study, and I like to point out to atheists that Libet himself was a big supporter of free will. You know, and he always interpreted his own work as, he believed that you could cancel it out, like the subconscious, puts it in there, but you can cancel it. He was a big proponent for free will. So I find it sort of funny that the atheists are using his work as some point when even he didn't interpret it as that.
Well, the atheists that do make that you do use that as proof, um, is usually aren't they're not really well read. I wouldn't say well
No.
educated, but well read because I don't really have a formal education. I just read a lot.
Mm.
I don't think I'm an intellectual or anything. I just have opinions. But with some of the bigger YouTubers like Armored Skeptic, which only
Mm.
got big because of Gamergate and because he got a really well loved you know
Well,
um
he invented a style too. I
girlfriend.
believe he was the first person that did the whole picture. The multiple atheists and some theists like Levitical. They have that style where they have a cartoon picture placed in front of the screen instead of showing their face. Sort of like what I do. I believe he kind of made that style, his own, and he kind of innovated that.
Yeah, I mean, I get why people actually watch his videos. They're slightly entertaining, but it's just like the whole wanting to yell at him that you're wrong about that. When he
Yeah.
starts talking about God and stuff like that, it's just like,
I believe he had one. I believe modernism was something he did a video on that really got a lot of hate by atheists and plenty of other people.
well, do you follow Dr. Lehman, my dude?
No, I do not. I would be interested in. I heard the name before, but I haven't got into it.
Well, Dr. Lehman is a somewhere in Europe. He's a social scientist, and he actually explained why Arma Skeptic was wrong completely about his whole entire concept of postmodernism. I mean, he has some pretty good videos. I watch a lot of atheist content, and I make a lot of comments criticizing that atheist content, and
Oh
some
yeah, I
are
mean,
like,
as you know me, I've posted in the Facebook post multiple times that I call out atheists on BS history, BS philosophy. I really call them out on all their stuff. Although we do find some common grounds on certain topics, we do, like, I tend to be against them on an intellectual level.
well, I'm more against the new atheist than the classical atheist.
Well, I mean, that's what I mean.
I think the
I think we
classical
both can admit that not, like, to any atheist that might be watching this, hashtag not all. Um, you know, you know, um, I believe that's a big misconception. Like, they think that we're like, guys like us, and even guys like Max, they have this conception that we're against all atheists. No, I like to say we're against a specific breed of atheist. It's sort of like saying, you're against a certain sect of black people that happen to be the criminals. Um, Saying that you're against those specific people does not make you a racist. You're not against them as people, you're against them for their actions.
I'm kind of against all people as criminals. Not. I'm not talking about just the
Well, I
general
mean, I'm just giving an analogy.
criminality, because technically
Yeah.
every single one of us breaks some kind of law
Oh,
every
yeah.
day. Um, but
Yeah, of
it's
course. At least a misdemeanor.
the organized ones, the ones that are actually organized to I haven't had any good um I don't have any good things to say about them.
Oh, no one. Like, I have some atheist friends, and we get along pretty good. We find some common ground, which, I'm very diverse in my friendships. I have pagan friends, I have Jewish friends, I have Muslim friends, I have Christian friends. You know, I'm very diverse in who I hang out with, and sure, they all try to convert me. Um, but I ultimately see them as they're good people, which I think a lot of the new atheists, I think they're intellectually dull to me. They repeat mantras, they repeat like slogans and catchphrases that Hitchens said, and they weren't even original when Hitchens first said them. They um they just tend to make stupid philosophical things. I mean, there was this one time just recently actually where I was talking to Jesus Mythicist, and he had issued a challenge, a completely historically illiterate challenge, where he said, try to read all the gospels of Jesus's life and try to come with a coherent story, you know. And I issued another challenge, and I said, read all the autobiographies written of George Washington, and within 100 years after he died, and try to come up with a coherent story from it. And an atheist commented below me and said, "No one is claiming, no one is claiming that George Washington's stories are a word of God. False dichotomy." And I really chewed this guy out. Like I actually feel bad about it because I chewed him out so bad for that. I said, for one, a false dichotomy, or better known as the either or fallacy, is when you say, it's either this or that, and you don't include the third option that there is something else. And I said, I did not do that. I made a second challenge. At most, you could say that I committed a false analogy, which there isn't because the topic is on history and had nothing to do with, what people think of these characters.
Well,
You know,
oh, I'm sorry.
yeah, I mean, there's people that deify George Washington. Like they fully believe the cherry tree thing, and all this. So I mean, I'm saying so. I mean, but that's irrelevant to the actual historical data on these people. There's just different interpretations, and so I was simply making another challenge to make a point. And I told him, at most, you could commit me of committing a false analogy fallacy. I said the only way in your mind, your idiot mind, that you could say that I committed a false dichotomy is if I said either Jesus's gospels are entirely historically accurate or none are, which I did not do at all.
Yeah,
So I
but
mean,
I mean, oh, I'm
these are
sorry.
stupid. Oh, you go ahead now.
Um, that kind of reminds me of something I read. I can try to find it really quick to flash it on the screen, but there's an actual post by somebody that was against Pinkard. Steven Pinkard, I think his name is.
Yeah.
Atheist historian. Historian. The air quotes there. That basically a failed professor who
Mm-hmm.
is now a blogger, and
Mm-hmm.
he wrote a book that it was like Jesus about Jesus not being a historical figure, and you
Yeah.
have like all these blog posts by historians um that was like, well, here are all the references of somebody called Jesus who was crucified by the Romans in Jerusalem, in the Jerusalem area. you know um Here's accounts of you know, non Christian accounts. Here's Jewish accounts, and stuff like that. And the whole blog post was about how he pissed off Steven Pinker by saying, you know, by claiming that what's in his book is basically wrong, factually, because he said that a text said something that it didn't, basically.
Yeah.
And and
It's
you
sort of like
you
a
saw
Richard
this.
Carrier.
Yeah, Richard Carrier. I'm sorry. Steven Pinker.
I, I, if there's anyone I despise more than Sam Harris, it would probably be Richard Carrier. He is such an intellectually dishonest man that, and he writes. If you read his blogs, he writes exactly like how I would call a Reddit atheist. Um, he is. There's no distinction. He's not a professional. He, you know, the only thing that he has going for him is the fact he has a PhD. And while that is good, there are also some young Earth creationists who also have PhDs, and I don't see atheists taking them as seriously because they have PhDs. To be funny, there are probably more young Earth creationists with jobs in relevant fields of biology than there are atheists like mythicists in relevant fields of history.
Yeah, I mean, there's. I agree with that. I can see that. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know why I get Steven Pinker and Richard Carrier confused. I really don't. I
Well, all atheist pseudo historians are alike.
Yeah, that is true. They all
Mm-hmm.
they all talk about the same things that are not really exactly true.
Yeah,
They're just ideological statements, essentially.
yeah. Um, you know, I actually read a full debunking by a Bayesian professor named Tom Hendricks, I believe, who completely destroyed the historicity of Jesus Christ by Richard Carrier. Completely demolished it. Um, One of the funniest things I got out of it, he made a perfect point about Richard Carrier's Reglian system of probability, where he put Jesus Christ among the other pagan gods. For one, he's factually wrong on almost all the pagan gods he says Jesus is like or resembles. But two, even if it was true, the most you could conclude from that is that the people that wrote about Jesus had a specific way of writing about him, not that Jesus didn't exist. For example, if you were to read like the story about George Washington cutting down the cherry tree, the whole his like the whole biographical account of George Washington in that story is completely fanciful. If you if you really went specific into it, you could probably put George Washington into some sort of category and deduce logically that he did not exist, which is obviously ridiculous if you're going by the same system. So, I mean, all you can conclude, even if it was true, is that these people had a specific way of writing about it, not that Jesus didn't exist, which is the whole point of Richard Carrier's book. So, his Riglian system is so bad that it's not even wrong, if that makes sense.
Yes, it seems more like fiction than anything else.
Yeah,
There's another book that was pure, I think, atheist propaganda. Um,
yeah.
there's a book that was basically about how the Catholicism created, um, the Romans created Christianity to get rid to hurt the Jews, to make the Jews stop being Jews, or something like that.
Yeah.
It was published in like 2012, I
Yeah.
think. Um, I saw it. It was a book I pirated, and It was so factually incorrect. I mean, it was, pure propaganda.
Yeah. To be fair, I think obviously at this point, atheists would believe in the flat earth if by some means believing in the flat earth hurt Christianity. I think that's all they're really interested. They're just interested in hurting Christianity, and no matter how insane they have to go in their beliefs, and no matter how ridiculous it has to come to, like I truly believe if believing in the flat earth hurts somehow create cause some terminal with Christian theology, they would believe it.
Oh, no doubt. I mean, there was there was a slightly long thing within atheism that atheists would, completely say no, there is no Big Bang that happened. That's all, li-
Yeah,
Catholic lies. And then later on, after we saw evidence, they stopped that narrative. Not only did they stop that narrative, but it seems like they erased that narrative from their memory completely.
yeah. George Lemaitre too. He's the one that said that. Um, he was the one that came up with the Big Bang theory, looking at. I mean, Einstein was very much against. I mean, he thought it. He was. Albert Einstein was a very complicated man. We don't really know what exactly he was because there's some quotes of him where you can deduce he was an atheist and some quotes where you can deduce that he was a theist. It's just becomes, like he's like, guys like Thomas Jefferson and Paine, where you can come to radically different conclusions based on a quote. So they're complicated people.
Well, with Albert Einstein, there's a little bit more history of him actually at least participating within Judaism. Um, and I think his wife was uh, not devout, but they would go during the he would honor the customs and traditions. He would go during Hanukkah and Yom Kippur whenever he could, because most of his time was in, in a New Jersey university teaching. Yeah.
Yeah. All I know is this: is that Einstein criticized the atheists back then as being dogmatic and not they're just after he described it exactly as following that they are simply prisoners that after having releasing the shackles of religion still feel and being free they still want to have a fight to fight. And he said he certainly wasn't like one of them. So I think if Einstein was alive today, he would be ashamed of the new atheist movement.
I think Albert Einstein would be against the new atheist movement, especially scientism. The replacing God for science, science with God. Essentially, that's what scientism is. He would be against it. Like a lot of atheist scientists are against it. There are atheists that were like, I forget when it was, like 2000 and I, I saw the actual article 2014 2015 where there was a study and theistic and atheist scientists would just like completely bash Richard Dawkins, and none of the questions was about Richard Dawkins. Some of the were from an atheist scientist that Richard Dawkins completely misrepresents science and claims that science does more than what its scope is, because the scope of science, if you know all through grade.
Science is a tool.
Yeah.
Science is a tool that that we are very good at, and I'm not saying anything bad about it because I'm very much a science person, but science is a tool that deals with the correlations of natural events. and it's a way that we come to knowing about the natural world. Uh,
Well, yeah.
to say that there's plenty of things that science can't deal with. Science, for instance, can't tell you if something is wrong or not. It's completely absent on morality. And some aesthetic truths and even some scientific claims can't be dealt with. Like, science can't tell you that you're not a brain in a vat being controlled by another scientist. You know, claims like that, science is completely outside the realms of science.
Well, anything dealing with absolute truths is also outside of the realm of science because if it wasn't right, like
Yeah.
we're so behind. We're not behind, but we're so like we're like infants or toddlers as far as our scientific progress. Even though our scientific progress has increased by leaps and bounds, we're still like toddlers because we have observed everything there is to observe on Earth, let alone our own solar system, and then there's other solar systems than that. So
Yeah.
you look at everything that there is to know, everything that is to observe. We haven't even a thousandth of it is being generous.
Yeah.
We know so little.
Yeah, no. I mean, if I could take anything from away from what Hitchens said, Hitchens once said that the wisest people that I've met are the ones that say like how little we know, or how Socrates would say, the only thing I am certain of is that I am not certain of anything. You know,
Well, you
so
really can't be certain of anything.
yeah.
To be honest.
Well, like all beliefs, they're all probabilistic. All beliefs are probabilistic based on the scope of background information. If we have to look to any belief, we have to look at the full background information and deduce what is the most logical conclusion given this background information.
Yep. I mean, and even when you're looking at the background information, and then you observe, like in quantum mechanics, for example, they use the Monte Cristo uh, simulation model, which is essentially, a computer program that is supposed to simulate how particles interact with each other. When you get into like atomic physics and stuff like that, to actually do the applied portions, you have to do simulations first to make sure that your experiment isn't going to destroy the Earth. Essentially, because we're that's the realm of things that we don't even understand, and it could very well lead to a cataclysm. It's one of the reasons why the Hadron Collider, those experiments are very, they're few and far between as far as it's not running constantly. They're not
Yeah.
constantly doing, you know, um,
Smashing atoms.
yeah, they're not constantly smashing atoms to see what's going on. They do it every once in a while, but they're really worried about it. Um,
Mm-hmm.
they're really worried about doing it too much because there's that, you know,
Yeah,
there's
there's always a risk.
a whole bunch of things that can happen we don't even know, and
Mm-hmm.
I I forget what we're talking about. I'm sorry.
Oh. Like when we were talking about probabilistic beliefs and science and atheism and how atheism can corrupt science.
Well, yes, yeah. Any ideology or belief system can corrupt science. I mean, even
Yeah.
there. I mean, there's instances that atheists like to show of Christianity doing, corrupting science, which I'm,
Like you said, any ideology, if pushed to its dogmatic, fullest, can corrupt anything. science being a tool that we use, it's like a shovel. If you give it into the hands of someone that is a lunatic, it's going to go wrong. But if you give it to someone that knows what they're doing, then you have more chance of having good results.
Yes, yes. The same thing can be said about philosophy. Philosophy is also a tool. It is a tool. It is a tool that is kind of needed for science. I think the going back to
Well,
the science.
all of science relies on philosophy.
Oh
When
yeah.
you look at it, it's all a methodology that's based on unprovable claims. Like, for example, we have to take on axiom, or like some atheists could say, on faith, that there is an external reality that we can learn something about. We can't prove that to be true. There's no scientific way to determine that is true, but we have to take it on as an axiom in order to do science. So there's a whole lot of philosophical claims you have to do, and when you even get out of that basic step of philosophy, the whole thing of doing repeated tests like imperialism and the whole other methodology is rested, you can't justify the method on the method itself. You have to take an axiom for it and get to the other conclusion.
Yeah, I mean, the most common axiom used within science, I would think, is Occam's razor, but it's slowly proving to that that's not always the best way because reality is complicated. It's complex. It's you can't boil it down to its simplest term always.
Yeah. Like I said, what's funny is that atheists tend to use Occam's razor to say, well, the simplest conclusion is that there is no God. And I say, you do realize that Occam was a theist, right?
Well, yeah, and there being a god, a ultimate intelligence that is running everything, um, that's more simplistic than everything just appearing from nothing and nothing not being the actual. I don't think nothing actually exists anywhere, but because that's
Yeah,
one of the few things that our imaginations can't actually imagine is pure nothingness. That
yeah.
it's something that our human brains cannot actually fathom. Um,
Well, as Aristotle once said, nothing is what rocks dream about.
yeah, yeah. I mean,
We can't do it, but a rock can dream it.
yeah. I mean, there's I can see that. I can see that. Um, I mean, there's a lot of weird things uh, that I've noticed about in this conversation. Not our specific conversation, but the overall conversation based around the oldest question in human history: is there a God? You know, it's a fascinating thing to look at history because like cave paintings.
It's deeply rooted into our psychology.
Yeah,
If you could, like, we don't know exactly, of course, when humans first started believing. Of course, our archaeology is very limited to the very scraps we can find. But we can say that for the longest time, humans have believed in God. Um, you know, Being an atheist is sort of abnormal. It's more, we tend to believe more in a God that does something. And while there was fallacious attempts of trying to explain away or trying to describe certain events, a lot of religions tend to have that ultimate guiding reality force, which we call God. Um, my I consider my deistic position to be of the properly basic variety. It's a properly basic belief. It is a belief grounded in experience and reinforced through philosophy and history. Um, I came, after I recently posted on my channel, Brass Wisdom, that my Mr. Brass channel, that my deconversion story, where I discussed, how I came to be a deist. I recommend people check it out if they want to learn more about me, and they generally just want to know, how I see deism or what are my stances are. Um, I get asked this sometimes by people, like, why did I call my channel Brass Wisdom? And, you know, and why do I go by Mr. Brass? Well, I consider it sort of like a Socratic name. Because we all know about brass rings. Brass rings are like the things that you get on your way to the top, but you never quite reach it. You just get all these brass rings. While wisdom I put in there is, so when I put brass wisdom, it's me grabbing just the nuggets of wisdom that I can put into my brain, but I ultimately realize I will never be as philosophically depth as I want to be. So I can only handle the scraps of the philosophy. So I call myself Brass Wisdom. If that makes sense, of course.
No, that makes sense. That makes complete sense to me. I mean, it's there's. I mean, it it's very interesting, really.
Mhm.
Your channel is very. I enjoy your content. I think you should post it more on the Escaping Atheism Facebook group.
Mhm.
More of your videos and stuff. That's just my opinion, but
All right.
because
I'll make sure to do that more often.
it's very enjoyable stuff, and I like
I
I like
actually got a video prepared that uh, it's going to be in a different sort of format. It's going to be more in a presentation style format where, because I don't want my channel to be exclusively debunking atheist dogma and BS. Although I will be doing that, don't get me wrong. But I
just
also don't want that to be the only thing.
it's
I
also
want,
boring.
it's also going to be about me and my journey as a deist, and it's going to be about my philosophical stances, and I might just try to call out some religious false religious dogmas, because I want to have intellectual conversations about things that I see are problems. um, I
Well,
find,
I'm sorry.
oh yeah, so I mean, I'm a free range person where, if I find that there is some inconsistencies or that there is some overall problem that needs to be discussed, I recommend people, tell me, what should I discuss, and I will try to just go, I'll try to do my best to go against anybody. You know, if it's a bad argument, it's a bad argument no matter who it comes from.
Yeah, that is very true. I mean, I kind of find debunking atheist content to be boring, me personally. But that's because I've been working on this video, and I just don't want to do it.
Mhm.
Dealing with Grim Jim's atheism hashtag atheism videos, and his starting videos of I'm going to debunk everything Max says, even though it's a group of people that he's talking.
You, Grim Jim, you mean Um, Aaron, the bootleg Aaron Raw,
Yeah,
bootleg
yeah,
bootleg British Aaron Raw.
yeah. Pretty much.
Um, you know, I watched some of his content, and he says absolutely zero that's original. Like once you get past the the typical atheist catchphrases, the bad history, the bad cultural knowledge of the Bible and stuff, you can pretty much, 90% of atheist channels become redundant. They all work like a hive mind, which I find funny because they say they're rational people. With I put the trademark symbol in that. They pretty much operate as a hive mind that I've noticed, and they don't have any original thoughts for the most part.
Well,
Like once you know the catchphrases and once you know the dogma, you can predict almost with good accuracy what they're going to say.
yeah, that's what makes it, very much a provable ideology, in my opinion. Is being able to you look at it and it's like, well, you know, no, what you're
Mm-hmm.
saying is kind of that doesn't seem right. It because a lot of them just talk out of their ass, to be honest. Like we talked about it privately before. What's her name? Bionic Dance.
Yeah.
Bionic Dance did a video that says, atheists aren't seen properly because theists, trash on atheism, and it follows the American Atheist Association's um, narrative that theistic oppression is why a lot of non-believers, is why, out of 22% in America that are non-believers, only 5% actually say I'm an atheist. They criticize the religious nuns and stuff like that by saying, hey, these people are oppressed by theists to think that we're bad, and it's like, no, no, these people just look at your content, look at what you say, and it's like, I don't want any part of that. Yeah.
Yeah. Um, to me personally, like to quote another atheist, atheism is unstoppable. Bionic Dance is an idiot. Um, quoting him directly from that, I would much rather have a stroke than watch her content because and hell, I feel that I could produce a more better philosophical video in a stroke like stance than she could using her full capacity. Um, she has she has bad animation. She doesn't know history, and unlike Jacqueline Glenn, she doesn't even have the the model looks in order to get her some views from 40-year-old men. She doesn't even have that going for her. So
Yeah, I mean, I would, I would agree. I mean, there's, it's mostly her. It what I don't like about her is mainly she is really essentially just repeating what better people have said
yeah.
for profit,
um
type of thing.
yeah,
A lot of them do that, and it's one of the big reasons why I joined the Escaping Atheism project myself, because I've
um
been arguing with atheists online for about 10 years now. Yeah,
uh
10 years.
oh wow, so it's been a decade goal for you.
And that's not even including the stuff that I did in the activism. That's sarcastic. Did as a kid, which was essentially being part of the see you at the pool thing that happened down in Florida in the
Mhm.
mid 90s. Um, it happened all over the South, as far as I was told at the time. But it was I started praying at the flagpole with other Christian children because mainly because of the whole entire narrative that teaching religious teaching your children your religion is child abuse. Um,
which
and
is ridiculous. No psychological study will ever go to that.
oh yeah, but with single parents, especially single fathers, it you know just saying that is enough to scare them, because it's with single fathers more than single mothers. You have this fear of your kids being taken away because you're looked at
Yeah,
a lot more closely than the mother is.
with
You're
the sex sense.
Yeah, well, it's not just that. It's the there's it's not just like the feminist type of narrative that that men are more you know aggressive, that men only want to have custody of the children to abuse their children and stuff like that. I luckily enough for me, there is enough a legal precedence in my case to show that that didn't happen, but they still always watched for the state always watched for child abuse. And when I say the state, I mean the state of Florida, not the federal government. Like,
Um, you know, so I mean, it's just ridiculous. Like atheists always say this whole thing. That's how I know it's just a catchphrase. They don't mean it. You know that if you make a claim, you have to back it up with evidence. They say that all the time. And they throw that at theists' face. But yet, when a theist catches them and asks them to provide evidence of the BS that they spill, then that's when the agnostic side of them comes out. It's only then. Like, I noticed this about even atheists like TJ Kirk, better known as the Amazing Atheist. You know, they're agnostic only when questioned. Like, if you watched, I don't know if you watch his content, but if you watch his Black Pigeon Speaks thing, in that video, he goes from, well, I'm just agnostic, an agnostic atheist. I haven't seen any claim, that God exists, evidence that God exists. In the very next video, I believe in either the next video or the next two videos after, he said there is no God. So it's just funny to me that the agnostic part only comes out when questioned.
well, that's more of a trick that they we can always go back to Anthony Flew here, because that this is where it came from, the whole positive claim, positive atheism being disbelief, and negative atheism being non-belief. That's how he split it up. The negative claim that I don't believe is not something that can be proven or should be proven according to Anthony Flew and the atheist proposition. However, the positive claim, the disbelief claim, I disbelieve that gods or God exists. Um, that has to be proven. But in philosophy, both positive and negative claims, there should be some kind of proof, even a rational train of thought.
Well, they tend to go, like, when I go to that link with them, they typically say, well, it's like a court case where, you're innocent until proven guilty. Well, and I say, well, even in a court case, like, if, let's say, for instance, you were going to jail for, like, you were on trial for murder, and I was your lawyer, my case would be to ward against any evidence that would put you in prison and make you not go to prison. I would have to present a good argument for why the evidence that the other side was doing could not be the truth. So even in the court case scenario that they put up, if I simply did nothing and I didn't try to defend you at all, for one, I'd be a bad lawyer. But it'd be incompetent work because your job is you have to put forward a good argument to show why this is not so.
Yeah, I mean, I could see that. I mean, it's just with the whole court analogy that's just wrong. Um, with
Mhm.
the defense, you still have to prove your innocence. That's why being able to have an alibi is
Mhm.
important, even when you're not going to you don't do anything wrong. Having an alibi, having witnesses saying, well,
I mean,
this person
we have
doesn't
to.
leave the house ever. So as an example, you have
I
people,
mean, like
you have.
like they'll typically say, "Well, eyewitness accounts don't count because they want to say there's no evidence for Jesus and stuff, and because there's no the eyewitness accounts." They said, "Well, eyewitness accounts are better than nothing." Like, of course, when we get eyewitness accounts, we have to be skeptical. But like, if we were to have a large case number, like let's say for your murder case, if we could have 20 people or 10, like 5 or 6 people that said they seen a person that looked like you, that was wearing clothes like you wear and stuff, it would make it more probable, not absolute, granted, that you were the murderer. It would be better than nothing.
That is true, but me as the accused, so me as accused, I have the right to bring up my own five witnesses that said this is where this person was. They were he never left. He never left. We can say without a positive, with with a with beyond a shadow of doubt that he never left the house while we were around. You know, that's always important to have, though,
Yeah.
even if you don't do anything wrong, because it's like I've actually seen people be wrongfully accused of something that they didn't do, and they were
Especially nowadays with the rape allegations that always like it gets rarely broadcasted, but there's a lot more than there is.
oh yeah, I mean, I'm not even talking about the rape, just in
Yeah.
general with the legal system. it, it
Mhm.
it's it's always good to have eyewitnesses that will you know people
Mhm.
around you. You don't want it to be false. You don't want people to perjure themselves. But
Mhm.
if you have like people around you that can say beyond a shadow of a doubt that you never left a certain place, you could not have possibly committed that you know burglary, from burglary to murder, to even rape. you know um
Mhm.
I've had friends that you know was saved because people were like, no, this guy was at a party at this house, there was this many people, you know we can all
Mhm.
attest to it, we can all show them, here's some pictures from the party, stuff like that. it, it,
Mhm.
it's 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 one of the
Mhm.
things that I think that Snapchat
Mhm.
stories and stuff like that is good, because you can it's evidence that you were doing something that just in case somebody accuses you of something. Well, you know my Snapchat story, for example, at 10:15 showed that I was at a party, and then my Snapchat story of me leaving, stumbling drunk at
Mhm.
1:30, being carried out by a bunch of people, corroborate that I was there from 10:30 to 1:30.
Mhm.
That type of thing is,
Yeah.
is
I mean, eyewitness testimony is good. I mean, like people need to get that we don't really prove anything. Like unless you want to get into the mathematical proofs, we get probabilistic evidence towards a conclusion. We have to take into account, what is the simplest explanation without, multiplying entities, without making leaps and jumps that we do not need to make. What is the most likely answer to be true? And that's all we do. There's no absolute really. It's just probabilistic.
Oh, I agree. I don't trust anybody that says this is the absolute truth. It's like, how do you know? Like, how do you know? I grew up in an area where there's a lot of fundamentalists, and I I I, I got I cut my teeth, so to speak, on philosophy and arguing with people by arguing with Christian fundamentalists. And, for most people, just arguing with Christian fundamentalists means that, they become atheists for some weird reason. But my arguments were always, you guys are wrong. Here's the parts of the Bible that, make me think that you're wrong. Here's, theology from, different types of religions that think that you're wrong. Like evangelical orthodox. I'm very I'm very sympathetic to evangelical orthodox because they're people that are working with the Eastern Orthodox specifically because they have a hard-on hatred for Catholicism more than any other Protestant denomination I've seen. But they've been working, those types of evangelicals have been working with Eastern Orthodox to make something more traditional and less like it is. Like a lot of evangelical churches, not all of them, but there's a lot of them that have this
So
Christian.
obviously, you're not one of the anti-Catholic ones.
Well, no, I was I spent years actually going through, most of my childhood is I come from a multi-dimension denominational family, from a household, my father who didn't actually teach me about religion. I'd have to go and teach myself and then ask him questions, and he would answer my questions a lot more than my teachers would. A lot of my teachers like, I can't answer that, on school grounds, I'll get fired. You have that type of fear of atheistic types of activism that I grew up with. And it's but I've been to Wesleyan churches. That's what my great grandfather was. Lutheran churches. I lived down the street from a Lutheran church until I was 13. And I went there for a little bit. I went to a Catholic church for a little bit, both the Holy Roman Spanish masses and the English speaking masses. Never been to a Latin mass, but that's something that's interesting. Greek Orthodox was something that was really big in the area that I grew up in. I grew up not that far from Tarpon Springs, like on the Gulf side of Florida. You know, good Goodfellas, where I grew up at, was shown in Goodfellas, the Wiki Wachi Springs scene. I think that was Goodfellas. I'm not sure. I think that was the only movie that the Wiki Wachi area was actually in a movie. But and it's as far as Christianity goes, I have a diverse opinion of it. I've been to Unitarian churches during the times when I studied polytheism as well, and it's I came to a specific conclusion, because for a while I wasn't atheist, and I wasn't exactly deist, but I wasn't exactly a practicing any type of religious rituals or anything like that. You could
You're
say
basically like a nun.
something like that, but I still believed in God. I still believed in God and Jesus and all that. It's just it's my whole story is like I searched and then I found something that I'm kind of settling on. I'm teetering between Judaism and Greek Orthodoxy.
Both good choices, if I may say.
Yeah, I mean, I think
They have a very rich history.
Oh yes, most definitely. I mean, but it's I'm leaning more towards Greek Orthodox. I've been I do multi faith type of stuff, multi faith groups and stuff like that. Where it's very interesting that throughout my experiences within theism itself, the whole broad range of it, there's so many. It's an intellectually diverse area.
Mhm.
There's so much intellectual diversity because even even among biblical literalists, which I'm like I said before, I'm I don't think that's an actual true teaching. Um,
Mhm.
and before somebody
I don't
says
either.
no true Scotsman,
Mhm.
Christianity itself actually has you know these rules, these conditions of
Yeah.
you can put the conditions of Christianity in an if and or statement, right? Or if and or statement. If I was actually making a program, um, and if it doesn't match with that, it would be not Christian. Um,
Mhm.
and there, like the articles of faith and stuff like that. Like every single denomination has articles of faith that are based on one of the
Yeah.
orthodox traditions.
Yeah. Um, People always say, well, there's so many different denominations. Well, not really when you really get down to it. There's a couple hundred when you get down to the like when you really go each base. They'll say something like there's 10,000 or something denominations, but when you think about it, all they really are is there's specific denominations for certain cities or certain sects, places. They don't really go much outside of Christianity. Like they pretty much agree with everyone. They're pretty much only a different denomination because they're in a different city or they're in a different country or something like that. Besides
Or
that, you
I
could
mean,
pretty much lump a whole bunch of them in the same place.
oh yes, yes, most definitely. I mean, when I say denominations, I mean actual, you know,
Oh yeah, I
governing
mean,
body.
well,
Because you have the independent denomination with the
I
non-denomination.
would say that there's a couple hundred. Like I say, like when you really get to the nitty gritty, you get like the widely diverse thing. And so you go down from a couple, like the tens of thousands, like atheists and other people say, to maybe around a good hundred or so. You know, because once you really go down to the nitty gritty and you go like whose interpretations are widely different from each other, that needs more discussion. You get down to like maybe 100 or so more denominations. And even for those specific denominations, that's a difference amongst brothers. And in a way, as a I can imagine a Christian could say that maybe God wanted to be like that because he wanted us to encourage us to want to find the truth of him.
Well, yeah, I mean, I would say that with free will and being able to make our own minds, and and it's like if you get a bunch of people together, right, at a beach, and you look at a sunset, each of those people in that group will describe something different, even though they all saw the same thing. It's the same thing with philosophy. It's the same thing with science. As far as science, I can make an example of done by phys.org and another science journalism that was talking about the Monte Cristo problem, which basically was a computer science um, document that said, you know, our current technology cannot actually model quantum physics. And then you had like phys.org looking at the same study, at the same you know thing, and come up with an article that said this proves that we can't possibly live in a virtual reality. And then another you know um another website said this proves that you know we have to be living in a virtual reality simulation. And it's like it does neither. But you still see it's just the differences of opinions, the differences of people looking at the same thing and just seeing something completely different. Now, whether
Right.
or not these people see something completely different because they're ignorant of certain things, I don't know. But It's
I mean, like another example I would say is consciousness. Like we were discussing before, like there is such a broad range of views. Like I've legitimately seen where consciousness, if you take the Daniel Dennett view, which people straw man him, he doesn't say consciousness doesn't exist. He says that it's so, feeble that it might as well not exist. You can go from that view to you can go to that the universe has consciousness. So you go legitimately from nothing to everything.
well. Have you ever read anything by Jung, Carl Jung?
Um, I read a couple works. I've been looking actually to get more into him. I've also been going into Sartre, um, and I've been trying to get into reading the Myth of Sisyphus. I can't say it, but
Uh,
he's definitely someone that I would like to get into.
he is an interesting thing. The collective unconsciousness, for example.
Mhm,
In that book, essentially he was trying to say that our collective subconscious would be God. It's a really interesting book. And I might be misportraying it because it's I read it a long time ago. I'm pulling things out of the depths of my memory here, so
mhm,
there's a lot of other things that I learned since I read Carl Jung that I've been wanting to go back to it too, actually, because there's um, but it was his work is really interesting. I think he was a pantheist, or
mhm,
a lot of his writings were inspired pantheism, um,
mhm.
and
I think that was a
it's very
popular thing back in his time.
Oh yeah, with quantum
Um,
mechanics, actually, that was the first time that people, when particles was actually, you know, mathematically proven to
mhm,
exist. And at the time, there's a bunch of people that were saying that that's just a Jewish invention, like particles and molecules and atoms. Those that's all Jewish invention. That's all part of the Jewish conspiracy.
mhm,
And not actually looked at, like Prussian science, for example, during World War One to the end of World War One. During Einstein's, while Einstein was actually in school. There's an interesting book. Um, I think it's his autobiography or his biography. I forget. I forget who wrote it. I don't know if he wrote it himself or if somebody else wrote it. But it's the his life was very interesting, and if you look at the scientific controversies that was during his time, it was it was a lot.
mhm.
It was a lot of arguing back and forth. Well, molecules can't exist. Quantum physics can't exist because this. And now we're looking at if in hindsight, because of how far it, because now quantum physics is now in a experimental phase. It's where we can actually observe it, observe
Yeah.
things that were mathematically proven before. Like atoms. We didn't prove atoms existed until like the 1950s with the electron microscope. And there are people that were skeptical that atoms actually existed.
Mhm,
It's looking at the history of science is really interesting, because it's like, well, where are we going what are they going to say in 100 years about this topic? Are they going to Who are they going to side with? Who are they going to laugh at? I think they're going to laugh at the atheists, like we a lot of people do now, about the Enlightenment era atheists, because
mhm,
they were just a funny lot.
mhm. Yeah, I mean, what's funny is that people like atheists latch on, they suckle the Enlightenment era as if it was some thing where everyone was an atheist, and just somehow later on they people became religious again. No, Atheism was as rare then as it is now, if not rarer. There was just more, there was more, willing, like freedom for atheists to speak out back then. Um, Although some were, some did fear persecution. Um, like people, I get on Christians that say this too, but technically Isaac Newton wouldn't be considered a Christian. He he was an Arian Christian, which, you know, he didn't believe in the divinity of Jesus. So technically he would be considered a heretic.
Well, that depends on where you in the cities mainly. Um, I've noticed as far as history goes, in the cities that's where the whole heresy thing was mostly concentrated. As far as the outside of that in academia and the country where Newton was from, you know, Newton was heavily into like um, alchemy and stuff like that, and a lot of his work with the human eye, he would experiment on himself, and
Yeah,
and a lot of
he
his
used himself as his own guinea pig.
yeah, and I mean it. He was one of the greatest physicists of that time, but at the same time, it's like since he was his own subject, it it, it may have put biases onto him, and then you have the whole alchemy part, which is misrepresented a lot because it's like alchemy was about transmutation, changing one thing from one substance to another, and that's a small part of it, but the transmutation that was mostly done um, was glass blowing, for example, was considered part of the alchemy, was a branch of alchemy at one time. And but the more spiritual alchemy, which is what all the evidence points that Isaac Newton actually believed in. He it was very much the transmutation of the soul, essentially
Yeah.
changing, and in a lot of ways, I'm he was he more seemed to be a deist. I mean, Aryan Christianity, I'm not really that familiar with it. I know that it is a
Well, the basic concept of Aryan Christianity, it's, I mean, it would be something more that Muslims could appreciate, where it says that the only difference really is that it believes that Jesus died on the cross for our sins and stuff like that. But they believe that, Jesus was not God, he was a prophet of God. Um, so, I mean, technically, it rejects all notions of the Trinity. So, technically, Isaac Newton, like, if we're going by our standards today, he wouldn't be considered he wouldn't be considered a Christian. He'd be considered a heretic that believes in a cult of Christianity.
well, yeah, but I mean, you also have to look at the time period that the Trinity was actually developed. The Trinity was developed in the 1800s. Sir Isaac Newton lived in the 1600s. It's the idea of Trinity was kind of passed around a little bit, but it wasn't accepted. It wasn't an accepted theology. It wasn't an accepted theory um, until the late 1800s. Um, I forgot Thomas something. It was a Spanish bishop that actually wrote the entire paper on the Trinity, and part of that was kind of what I personally think is a misrepresentation of the Jewish text. But that's my opinion. I mean, I don't reject the Trinity. It's just there's arguments that I'm not going to give people that is against the Trinity. If they haven't come to these arguments themselves, I'm not going to help them out. But I mean, it's
I
ultimately
tend to do a
it's
joke.
okay.
I tend to do a joke with the Trinity. You ever watch that movie, The Human Centipede?
Yes, yes.
That's the Trinity.
Well, yeah, I
Three
understand
three
that joke.
person three persons connected. Three persons are connected as one.
Well, it's not even that. It's a very profound notion, though. I think the idea of the Trinity. Like I can criticize it, but I can also see the validity in it as well.
I can too. I mean, I think it's a very philosophical, as long as profound, stance to take. Um, I can, I have Jewish friends, I have Muslim friends, I have pagan friends, and they'll all say the idea of a trinity is sort of absurd. But I try to tell them also that they have to, you know, be more open and not, try not to be biased towards it. And I say there is some, philosophical validity to it, and there has actually been some Jewish scholars who have put forward that the Trinity has been around in some form since even before Jesus.
Well, you have the more what I would call extremist Jews that says that the Trinity is completely from paganism, and that completely proves that Christianity is a pagan religion. And I don't agree with that at all. It's like the Trinity itself was originally like in the actual biblical Hebrew, you have Adonai, Elohim, and then the name of God that nobody says. The actual pronunciation of that word has been lost to time. I mean,
Yahweh.
well, yes, but that's not. We're not exactly sure on
Mhm.
how to pronounce it. That's it's e- e- even Jews would there's even within among Judaism there's an actual scholarly debate on how to pronounce that word. It's so it's not, but that thing, that the three aspects of God, the Lord part, the
Mhm.
part that rules over us, which is Adonai, and then you have the Elohim, which is more the Holy Spirit, and then
Mhm.
God, as in the being of God,
Mhm.
is the Jehovah, Yahweh, whatever you want
Mhm.
to say it. There's no consensus on how to say that word, but
What's
I
funny is, that meme, Yee and Peak, the
yes,
dinosaur.
yes,
I can say, someone can make a meme out of this. I'd say Yee-way, like Yahweh,
I
but Yee-way.
I've actually heard Jews try to um actually say, hey, that's a way that it could be pronounced. It's
Mhm.
not something that I mean, Yahweh is we'll just go with that, because that's you know seems to be a consensus among people, but it's good to know that the way that certain words were pronounced, we don't know how they were pronounced anymore. We don't have any audio files from back
Yeah,
when, so we
of course, and
we can't say for
language
sure.
has changed so much
Yes,
over
yeah.
the course of thousands of years.
Well, even
Um, I
even
make a joke too about that. You know, you have Yahweh and his twin brother Noah,
yeah,
Yahweh and Nahweh.
yeah. I mean, but the
I
whole
believe Yahweh
idea.
was like considered. Wasn't that supposed to mean like I am?
Um, no, that was the part of the I am.
Mhm.
The part of where God told Moses, I do not need a name. I am. I am. But if you must put a name on me, here is the name. here's the name that I give myself. But that's not important. I mean, it just didn't seem like that was the more important thing that I think it was trying to show is
God was more of an action than he was like a personal thing that you could
yeah,
name. If
yeah,
you read into the old Jewish scripture, he was more of an action. Like some Jewish people even say that when you're saying God, what you need to do is put like a hyphen next to him or something, the between the O. So because God isn't a noun; it's a verb.
well, yeah, but that's also there's also the reason why that's done in print is more, because you write it down on a piece of paper or put it in a book, right? People throw away
Yeah.
books and stuff. People throw away a piece of paper, and to throw away the representation of God is sacrilege.
Yeah.
It's just not done. That's why they do it. But to get back on point, the whole Trinity thing. Um, you have this aspect and showing that there's three parts of God. There's three actionable parts of God that have three different names. To it's the same being, but it's three different names. And what the Trinity does, as far as I've read, it does that same thing, except for instead of Adonai, Lord, Jesus takes the Adonai part, and then Elohim would be the Holy Spirit, and then like you can see in the transliteration, because there's no actual translations. They're all localized transliterations into English, Spanish, and whatnot. Um, it all differs from. I mean, if you were to actually take the ancient Hebrew and ancient Greek and translate them directly into English, you would have fragmented sentences. It wouldn't make much sense, um, because there's inflection and stuff. There was you know there there's some parts that are lost in translation. Because for many different reasons. I mean, at one time before the World War II, the Jews were very insular people. They didn't want anybody else inside of Judaism, which that wasn't in Judaism. But then, you had people that you had the I wouldn't say Christian. I wouldn't say it was because of Christianity. It was because of certain people that called themselves Christians that just
Yeah.
did not like the Jews that forced them to convert. Like there's instances in all over. Like if you were to
Yeah.
actually study the history of Messianic Judaism, for example, which is something that I would look at more. I would tell people to look at it a little bit more closely, because Jews for Jesus and stuff like that gave it a bad name. There's actual historical reasoning that this was an actual Christian denomination that came from the time of the prophets, that I'm not time of the prophets, time of the apostles, where you had at least one or two of them, at least one or two of the apostles would have kept the Jewish orthodoxy, and you know um but it that's an interesting it's an interesting course of study, because you see in England, for example, Messianic Judaism during the Middle Ages was really suppressed. Like a lot of the kings and lords and stuff within Britannia did not like the Jews. Um, you could see that all throughout Europe too, and it could be multiple different things. I personally think that it's because of the major differences between cultures. The Europeans, Western Europeans, really they they really depended more on swine, on working cheese than beef. I mean, um, they still had beef and bovine, but it just seems like in Spain and Britain and stuff like that, that pigs were, boars and stuff were more, they existed more there. That's where a lot of them, a lot of the cultivation of swine and stuff like that happened. Um, at least in my opinion. I mean, I'm not going to say it's absolute historical fact, because to say that, there's somebody like me out there that that will listen and be like, here are the reasons why you were wrong in your assumptions. So I'm not going to say it's absolute truth. I could be wrong, but it just seems like that pig was a very big staple, at
Mm-hmm.
least for the rural areas of Western Europe.
Yeah. Anti-Semitism, in my opinion, is very stupid. When, like, personally, I believe it should be one of the things that disqualifies you from being a Christian, because Jesus, undoubtedly, unquestionably was a Jew. If you are going to be consistent in your Christianity, and you're going to be an anti-Semite, you have to hate Jesus. But if you hate Jesus, then how can you claim to be a follower of Jesus? So I would consider that somewhat of a disqualifying point.
Yeah,
There's no
I
question.
I would agree with that. It's just we're looking at we're looking at the Middle Ages, though.
Yeah,
Our sense of morality evolved throughout time,
yeah.
because you
I
can
mean, well, I mean,
look at
I don't
ages.
know if you're a moral. I don't know if you're a moral realist or not. I mean, some people would say that, like inspiring philosophy, who I very much enjoy his work, he would take the stance that they weren't wrong, they just didn't have the correct information. In the sense, they were naive. We're all working towards, the absolute good. We just don't know it.
Yeah, I could see that. I mean, me personally, I'm more like morality evolved.
Yeah.
Morality is an evolved portion of us. You can't really get you know away from morality. You can't, if you try to actually separate yourself from morality, you're usually called a psychopath, because
Yeah.
it is, we you know whether it's created or not, it seems to be an instinctive thing. It seems to be
Yeah.
like this, we know that killing other humans is wrong. I mean,
Yeah.
we could objectively see that it is wrong, because even in cases of self-defense where there's legitimate self-defense and you're going to die. It happens among veterans. That's the experience I have with that. But these veterans know that the people that are shooting at them, we're trying to kill them, but they still have, it still damages them.
Yeah.
Moral damage, and psychological damage comes from taking a life. I mean, science
Yeah.
has proven this. There's,
PTSD is very common amongst veterans.
yes, yes,
I actually myself have a grandfather that, fought in the Vietnam War, and, give lots of mad respect to him for doing that. Because, unlike the current Iraqi war, like, the veterans of Vietnam were treated pretty much like, crap. You know, my grandpa would tell me all stories about it, about, how when he first came back from his tours, he would, he got, pelted on by people, he got called names, he got called a murderer, a horrible person, and he didn't even like the war when he was there. He, I mean, he loved fighting for his country. That's what he did. But I mean, he didn't approve of some of the stuff that America did, but he, had a commitment as a soldier. But, it was bad because, he got no respect once he came back.
Well, yeah, I mean the Vietnam War was
Crazy.
oh yeah, it was crazy, but there's also a lot of political aspects to it because
Mm-hmm.
in the United States, something that he didn't know at the time, because there's
Mm-hmm.
no internet, there's no way to actually, and family members aren't going to talk about the nuances and the propaganda that's going on while they're over there. That's just you know that's just not something you do, military families do, because
Mm-hmm.
you're potentially undermining the person's convictions while they're in a combat zone.
Yeah.
That could kill them. So,
Yeah.
there's but there's a lot of, in hindsight, really,
Mm-hmm.
as somebody who has had uncles that had to go and fight in Vietnam. In hindsight, it that was that whole conflict was, you know essentially, it was a proxy war with Russia, because the
Yeah.
Vietnam, because all throughout Asia at that time, communism was spreading. Joseph Stalin and Mao and stuff like that was just pushing it on them.
Yeah.
Um, and it was really,
Militant atheistic communism, if I may add correctly.
yes, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I don't actually think that there's any difference between the
Mm-hmm.
two, to be honest. Um,
Mm-hmm.
like I don't see how I don't see anything but communism being a militant atheistic movement, at least in the
Well, I
way
mean,
it was
right now, at least right now, it's more Christian, and like Vladimir Putin is a born again Christian, um, and he's been called, out for some of his militant Christian ideas. So I mean, it seems communism has gotten more religious.
Yeah, but I'm not sure that Russia in its current state is actually communist. I don't think Putin is trying to make another USSR right now.
Yeah,
Right now, what Russia is doing is just trying to keep its small stake of oil that it has, which is in Syria. Syria. I mean, there's a lot of politics behind that too, because
yeah,
Iraq would, Saddam would be, selling through Assad, to Russia, his oil that he wasn't supposed to sell to anybody in the UN, due to UN sanctions for trying to, you know, take over Kuwait, essentially, which is not something you want to actually talk to an Iraqi about, because they actually really see how indoctrinated those Iraqis were against the Kuwaitis, because you talk about the Kuwait War, um, to an Iraqi in Iraq, and they have opinions on it you know that is not correct.
yeah.
It's factually not correct, and then you talk to what did you learn in school about certain aspects, and it's like the meme Hitler did nothing wrong. Well, the Iraqis were actually taught Hitler did nothing wrong.
Yeah.
You know,
Oh no, it's just these things are crazy with that. I mean, it's a good thing Hillary wasn't successful and he was a buffoon, or he could have done more damage.
well,
You
I mean,
know,
he was leader for like what, 40 years, 30 years, something like that,
I mean,
since the
well, I mean, the
60s.
thing is, I mean, he was good at He was good at politics. He knew how to control the masses, and part of that he did by manipulating religion. You know, and for the most part, no one believed him. Like the real religious people, there were plenty of theologians and devout Christians that died at the hands of Hitler and stuff. You know, so I mean, it was all talk with him. You know, he very much manipulated the masses with his religious talks.
Well,
He
he manipulated, the masses not just with his religious talks. He would actually execute, Jews and Christian farmers who never left Iraq, who didn't have any way of contacting outside of Iraq. He would execute them for being CIA and Israeli spies on, on not on a daily basis, but on a weekly basis. Whenever something went wrong, and he had to blame somebody, he'd blame the Christians and be like, this is an American CIA agent. He would do the same thing with the Sunnis too, because he claimed to be a Shiite. Um, even though he passed laws that were, very un-Islamic, like he allowed um, he allowed for drinking within Iraq. He didn't go the full, Sharia law. Iraq wasn't Sharia law based. The law in Iraq was weird. The the way
yeah,
the way he structured the legal system and stuff, it was just weird. It was Arab socialism. Um, that's what it was. That's what the Ba'ath Party was officially was called, Arab socialism, and it was just like, I don't know, man.
yeah,
It's when you see that type of suffering, it's just like, you can't take anybody that's in the West says that they're oppressed seriously. It's like, no, you haven't lived, 20 plus years malnutritioned, you know and having to work in fields and in a desert environment where you grow nothing, and that may be because you have like barrels of or something that is buried in your farm. Yeah.
yeah. I mean, yeah, there's just so much of that. It seems like everyone wants to be a victim these days. It's like the new trend. You know, if you're not a victim, then you're an oppressor, and no one wants to be the oppressor, so everyone just wants to be the victim.
Well, that's just basic Marxism right there.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, well, you know, I don't actually see that. You know, I don't just because people are shitty towards me, and I am in return shitty towards them because that's just how I am. That doesn't mean I'm being oppressed or I'm oppressing somebody. That just means that I'm not following what my my uh principles should
Religious. Yeah.
be. I'm going outside of my principles when I treat people as badly as they treat me in some cases. Um, and but I'm not oppressing anybody by doing that, and they're not oppressing me by doing that. We're just being human beings and reacting, you know, like human
Well,
beings react.
well, you have to keep in mind that even Jesus Christ called people names.
Well, yeah, yeah. I mean, I'm not
He
saying,
especially had a thing for the Pharisees.
but he also had some harsh words for the Sadducees too. I mean,
Yeah.
he had harsh words for a lot of people, but it's he was also that was also his purpose. Even if you don't believe that he was God made flesh, essentially, um, you know, he 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 was still, working as a prophet. He was still trying to do the prophet's work of because each and every prophet, right, before Jesus and everything, each and every prophet, they've been their whole shtick was to actually guide Judaism. um, Whenever, because you look at the historical record of the kingdom of Israel during certain prophetic times, and and the descriptions of it, and it's like, okay, well, there's obviously something wrong going there. you know um there's several, like, I think there is like six different civil wars, um before 70 AD. And
Yeah.
I mean, the 70 AD war was called the Third Jewish Civil War, but I mean, there's, if you look at if you look at the Bible as partially historical, which it is, it there are several other Jewish civil wars.
There's, I believe Max Kolbe got it right. The Bible is full of historical and spiritual truths.
Yes, yes.
Um,
There's and,
it
and
requires deep study in order to get it.
yeah, I mean the Old Testament is very very much the the history of the Jews as much as it is a spiritual document. It's history of the dual monarchy essentially, and but because by the time 70 AD came around, which was I think the second, that was when the Romans came in and took Jerusalem and changed its name to Aelis Copula or something like that. Changed and changed it from changed the Israel to Syria and Judea to Palestine. Um, that's essentially what happened. Just to thumb, it seemed like it would have been a just a minor roadblock, but if it was just a minor roadblock, why would they insult the people there, but not actually change Egypt in such a dramatic way? Because that was the road to Egypt, and they would just you know that was their main goal was Egypt, was conquering Egypt during that march. But it was why would they actually do that kind of insult if wasn't some if they weren't at least a you know I'm not saying that they were like this big huge empire, but they were at least big enough to be the vassal states of Egypt and the Persian um, empire. They were big enough to actually control in the place of the Persian empires and the Egyptian empires, which couldn't actually send official parts of their government. They just let the Jews um, control the Arabian Peninsula. Um, like Yemen was controlled by a Taliesin, was controlled by Judeans essentially, and then on the other side of Yemen, where Saudi Arabia is, that was Israelites. It's a very interesting part of history that isn't really delved into that much.
From my studying of the Old Testament, because I find that to be fascinating, is you have to really in order to understand it, you have to get into the culture of the time. When you take it, I would say in a literalistic sense, I think you miss out so much on the history, and you're depraving yourself of learning.
Oh yeah, yeah,
And
most definitely. I mean, that's one of the
yeah,
reasons
and
why I lean towards Greek Orthodoxy, because it's to the Greek Orthodox way to actually read the Bible is to go you know historical record, science of the time, then text. Like you're supposed to learn about the culture of the time, what common knowledge was at the time, what the scientific common knowledge was, what the scientific common knowledge of the elites were, and then then you read it, and then everything makes it makes more sense that way. I'm sorry for interrupting.
it is fine. You know, if you want to be, if it sounds funny about how I actually got into the escaping atheism project. Um, I've had my dealings with annoying atheists, still do, and I kind of enjoy it for the most part. I like pointing out BS. And how it's funny is how I actually got into the project was by a Mr. Tim O'Neill, the amateur historian, who runs who runs the website correcting atheists on bad history. Um, what was funny is like I was wanting, to find material, about atheist bad history, and he recommended me Borden Painter's book, The Atheist Denial of History, and he recommended me Max's channel, you know, um, his old channel, Escaping Atheism. But he of course warned me that it was a Christian apologetic channel, but he said the interview was fine. And so
Tim
I watched it.
Tim O'Neill said this. Really, that's
Yeah.
weird. I mean, we've never actually said we were a Christian apologists. Actually, me and Max fought about that in the beginning of the project because it was at the time I was really into Milo Yiannopoulos, and I was trying to be like, well, the because as far as apologetics go, that's almost completely evangelical run. Um, Orthodox apologia doesn't actually exist. Um, so it's like as far as defending the faith and what apologetics should be, because anybody can be an apologetic.
Well, I mean, if you define apologist as someone that is defending a specific position, like which I think is the dictionary definition of an apologist, um, then Richard Dawkins is technically an apologist. He's an atheist apologist. Um, he's also an angry one at that. So he's an angry atheist apologist. So AAA. Um, you know,
Yeah, but I
with
mean, I'm just it's just surprising that O'Neill would actually recommend the channel to somebody because, as far as I knew, Tim O'Neill, that's actually kind of flattering.
I don't think he was really much of anything. I think he said, well, Borden Painter did an interview, check the interview out, but try not to really, not to care about the the Christian apologetic side or something like that of it, and just listen to Painter. I think that was kind of the point he was getting across. Um, so I eventually checked it out, and I became very interested in the channel. And I said, what the hell, I'll subscribe. And I eventually found out that we had a Facebook page. I got more involved, and eventually I found myself a member. And it's been sort of a blast since I've done it. I've posted memes. I've posted critiques of atheists such as Sean Carroll. Um, I've done one on Lawrence Krauss. I plan on doing one in the future with Matt Dillahunty. Um, you know, I might actually do one and put it on my channel. I know I did one with Sam Harris where I think I did a very thorough job of completely, annihilating him. On
Yeah,
it.
I mean, I agree with you with that. I mean, I did enjoy the Sam Harris videos on your channel. It was really good.
You know, I mean, because it's really quite fair. I mean, he gets paraded about that he is a neuroscientist and that he is a philosopher. Case point, he has never wrote a philosophical paper. He's openly encouraged in his book, that he does not, he's not into reading philosophy because he thinks it's boring. And and philosophers generally think he's pretty sucky at philosophy. So he is not the go-to person to be called a philosopher.
Well, not only that, the isn't the neuro whatever PhD he has, it's isn't that just honorary?
Well, it's a funny point about that. Sam Harris is a rich boy. He his dad was an actor and his mom was like a TV producer, like a TV show executive or something like that. So he was legitimately made in money. Um, and he's pretty much gone his whole life being made with money. And his PhD came partly from the fact of his own business. And when you look it up, he actually did not even do the experiment that got him his PhD. And and even if we considered it legitimate, which if you look at statisticians, William Biggs, he says, and I quote, it's garbage. The the two papers that he wrote, like that had experiments done to them, was about religion and morality, and they made constant reverse inference fallacies in general, along with a bunch of other stupid mistakes that should have really gotten them disqualified. And so, I mean, he hasn't done anything of reputable um, my knowledge of neuroscience. So, let me get this straight. His PhD, he did not do the actual experiments. The experiment in themselves were horrible. And he has ultimately done nothing of use with the information that he did from that experiment. So, on what grounds can you really say that he is a neuroscientist? He's simply a guy with a degree in neuroscience that has done nothing about it.
Well, yeah, I mean, but and you can say that about a lot of people. A lot of people that are, failed scientists and failed, you know, go into atheist activism or some kind of activism. I mean, you have certain failed neuroscientists that go into the went into feminism, for example, and you can see that there's failed law students that did,
There's failed historians.
yeah, failed historians. I
I
mean,
mean, if you pretty much you take all the failures and you put them into one group, you got about maybe a good 70% of the atheist activists.
yeah, I mean,
At some point, I think I honestly don't know if they have I know they have a recruiting method, but I would typically think that they would look for more qualified people. But you also have to see that atheism is a pretty small group, so they have to take what they can get.
well, and then you look at, if you look at like new atheism and specifically, that's even a smaller number because it just seems to be led by people that are very very much militant anti-theists. you know
Yeah,
their anti-theism, specifically anti-Christian Christian, is what drives them. It
yeah.
is the conclusion, the pre-made conclusions that they have come to, that they try to argue is correct.
Mhm.
And there's a lot of like the what really drew me to this project, the Escaping Atheism Red Pill Religion project, was excuse me, sorry, um was that this over time, right, from the
Mhm.
60s until now, atheism seemed to try to social engineer, like they don't want to live in a society where religion is seen as good and as valid enough to be part of society and be part of politics. They really do not want that at all.
That's the First Amendment.
Well, yeah, I mean, but they completely um they've worked the separation of church and state since the 60s.
Well,
And
I mean, if you think about it, Stalin was very much against church and state, although he kind of took it to a very extreme level. the separation between church and state under Stalin was done with guns and cannons and bombs.
Well, yeah, but I mean, it's is it really, if you pervert an idea that is a founding principle of a nation, how is that any different, really? Other than people not dying for it,
Yeah.
people not dying, people not getting killed and murdered in the streets, yes, but it's how is that any different? It's a violent coup, and a bloodless coup is still a coup.
Yeah.
you know,
Well, I always found it funny that a lot of atheists will say that Stalin wasn't a true atheist, which, as we all know, is the no true Scotsman fallacy. But, the thing is, like, on one hand, like, they seem to be inconsistent because, you know, in order to say that Stalin is not an atheist, you have to actually have some tenets to atheism from which you can say that he does not follow. If there is no such tenets, then how can he be against any of them? I mean, with
yeah, I
with
mean,
with Christianity, there's a lot of things that are allowed, but after a certain point, if you ignore enough doctrines, you butcher enough things, or you take things to certain levels, people will not hesitate to say you're not a Christian. You may think you are, but you're really a heretic. We can know you're a heretic, if you break certain guidelines. But if atheism, as they say, is nothing, then there is legitimately nothing Stalin could break that could say he is not an atheist.
that is completely true. I agree with that. Um, it's 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 just messed up
Yeah.
because have you ever seen the Stalin quote meme about the book? Um,
Um,
all right. Here's the story. It is a story about somebody who supposedly was either friend of Stalin or met Stalin, right? And he goes up to this guy and he goes, "I have a book. Let me share with you a book that will make you not believe in God anymore." And he hands him the book on of by Charles Darwin.
Evolution,
Yeah, and
the origin of species.
yeah, the origin of species, and you know that was actually that is actually a meme because there is a quote. There are several quotes attributed to Joseph Stalin that talks about him going around and showing him the origin of species to people to make them into atheists,
Mhm.
and it's just funny.
Yeah. So he was kind of an evangelical atheist,
and and
and
and,
his
and
Bible of choice was a book of Charles Darwin.
yep, who was a Christian, whose theory, his Origin of Species book did not make him not a Christian. It's you know he he's
I was, there's a quotes of him that that says he was mainly agnostic or he was like a weak deist. Um, which he never wanted to really come out and say he was an atheist, from as far as I know. Um, and here's what's a funny thing: early on in Charles, like many young Earth creationists, like to believe that this was, the problem between evolution and the Bible was this grandstanding thing that's happened ever since the beginning. No, that's not true. We know that's not true because Charles. There's plenty of quotes from Charles Darwin that where Charles Darwin specifically says, and I quote, "One can be an ardent theist and an evolutionist." And Charles Darwin had friends that were theists who embraced evolution.
Oh yeah. I mean,
during his time frame. So I mean, this it's not like ever since Darwin came up with the theory that Christians have been against it. No, it was widely accepted at first. I mean, well, of course, any theory in science has to go through its rigors before it's considered widely accepted. But I mean, it was not like hated or met by negative press by Christians by the most part.
well, yeah, because it's the idea that we are created instantly is not one that many people. It's not a historical Christian or Jewish perspective.
I
It's
don't know if you read. I don't know if you read the. I'm trying to think of the word for the church found like the early Christians, the early Christian people like Eusebius,
pre-Nicene pre-Nicene Creed or post-Nicene Creed. When you talk
um
about the early
like
church,
fourth
there's
century,
okay. So
um like you get a quote from Basil, and Basil, from in reading Genesis 120, he says something that sounds, I believe I got the quote up, but he basically says, why does the birds, why do the birds, um, in the come after the fish or something along those lines? And he says that they both share like a common family link, and they have it. They share a similar common derivation. That was Basil in the fourth century, and so I mean, you have this quote from Basil, a Christian that predates Darwin by thousands of years, by about like 1400 years, I think.
and then you also have the Jewish scholars who use the Talmud and um like who created a mathematical equation essentially from using Talmud and Torah that predicted the Earth's age around 13 billion years old, way before carbon dating was ever invented, or until before the age. It was just like because they're trying to figure out the how long 7 days was to God. Because the Jewish theology on that is God does not experience time the same way as
Well, I mean, here's what I always found funny about this, and I say this to young Earth creationists too. What is time to a timeless being? Like, to God, I would imagine a second is the same as 1,000 years or, 50,000 years. Like, time is not a thing that God knows of. He creates it, but he is not affected by it.
well it's actually pretty close to what you said. A one day is approximately like 1.3 billion years or something like that. I forget. Whatever is multiplied by seven, that gets pretty close to 13 billion. Um, it's weird when you actually read those texts because the concept of billion is relatively industrial age. Pre-industrial age, 1,000 was a huge number, and it's they didn't really have a concept for million until like into the Middle Ages. So
Yeah.
when I say 13 billion, I'm taking I'm taking my perception of how they actually came across words and just modernizing it to
Yeah.
because
And like another thing you have to realize is that like I've actually done, some of the ages myself, but when you do the ages in Genesis, they all follow, like almost all of them follow base 60. You know, sexagismal. Like they follow the Sumerian base 60 formula. Um,
Well, yeah, I
you
mean,
know,
the Sumerian culture was huge. That was a huge empire. That spanned, from the tip of the from the Arabian Peninsula up to Iraq before the Persians took over. Um, that was a big, that was a pretty big empire. That was,
and you have to consider this too. Like to the Jews of the time, numbers, were sacred, not because they actually represented like, what we would think of as a year, but because the number themselves, symbolize something like a flag or, like they were symbolisms of sacred, sacredness of God.
that is a very simplistic way to put it. I mean, numerology itself is a very complicated study. Jewish numerology, and in particular, each and every single separate number has an actual meaning to it. It's like the number 13. Like you'll see Jewish numerology in the New Testament a lot, and I'm surprised that Christians by large haven't really caught onto it. Number 13 symbolizes love, redemption, um, and
And when Jesus the day
forgiveness.
that Jesus got crucified.
It is the number of Metatron. Um, there was all, including Jesus. There's 13
You said
principles.
Metatron, right?
Yes, yes. The
I thought
voice
for a
of
minute that you said Megatron.
no, Metatron. The voice of God, essentially the angel that spoke, the angel that actually spoke to Moses, that put him into the rock when God fully made himself visible, so that Moses wouldn't die. That was Metatron, according to Jewish theology, and his number is 13, and all the principal characters, minus the females, um, the female characters, all the principal characters add up to 13. You add in, the Mother Mary and Mary Magdalene, and the whore that washed Jesus' feet. She's a secondary. Yeah, she's
People
not.
always find people, some
But
I've noticed some even Catholics, they try to attribute that whore that washes Jesus' feet as Mary, but that's not true.
well, I mean, that was actually stated by a pope, and then another pope went back and said that pope was wrong,
Yeah.
because Mary Magdalene, there's actually no story of her in the New
Only appeared like three
Testament.
or four times in the New Testament at all.
Yeah, but there's actually no story of her. The only thing we actually know for a fact is she followed Jesus. She was a follower of Jesus. The whole Dan Brown, like the Dan Brown book,
Yeah.
that got a bunch of Protestant. It's weird. It got a bunch of Protestant Christians all upset, but all my Catholic friends really loved the book. It's funny because it
The Da
was,
Vinci Code.
yeah, the Da Vinci Code. Dan Brown's series of work, because he did the Da Vinci Code, Demon and Angels, and stuff like that. Eastern Orthodox and Catholic circles really enjoyed that book. It was weird to me because it was like, but they're criticizing the Catholic Church. I mean, it's
And they basically say that Jesus, had an affair with, Jesus was married to Mary Magdalene
yeah. I mean,
and
but
and had children that would still walk among us, which is completely wrong.
I mean, yes and no. I mean, if you really wanna look at it, from it is possible. It's a possibility that he was married. He may or may not have had children, but in order, in as far as Jewish culture goes, it wasn't. uncommon for rabbis and very spiritual people to be married. There were prophets that were married. There were one or two prophets were married. I mean, it was almost a requirement for that. So I mean, there's a basis, but it's a story of fiction. And first and foremost it is a story of fiction. It explores.
Well, another thing that was common back then was also for religious people to forego sex at all, and live a celibate life, and granted, how Jesus was very, he was very much against, you know, um, you know, he was very much like, against, being rich and, giving into temptation. You know, we can say, we historians generally, from all I can see that it's just more likely that he just never had sex at all. He mainly focused on his mission at hand. Although, it is possible.
I mean, it's possible either way. We don't actually have a.
Well, we weren't there.
Yeah, we weren't there, and we don't have we even then we don't have a full account. I mean, because paper is brittle, papyrus
Yeah.
and even clay tablets.
Although I think of something funny.
Not everything that
Um,
was written down has actually survived up to now. So it's I say it's still a possibility either way. There's no definite absolute answer to that one.
yeah,
But I mean it's but Dan Brown's work is work fiction, and it's
yeah.
not it doesn't have truth to it. There's no evidence that shows it, but it could have been possible. It's an interesting thought experiment. You know.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of find it funny if you really think about it, because, like, let's just give Dan Brown the credit, and let's just say, for the sake of argument, Jesus did, have a child with Mary Magdalene and got married to her. Technically, I wondered if that would affect the Trinity at all.
I don't actually think it would, because it's just that would it'd be what it's um essentially if you want to go through it a Nephilim that God allowed to survive for some reason. I mean, because there could be a reason that if that happened, because Jesus had brothers and sisters. He had brothers at
Yeah,
least. So Mary wasn't an eternal virgin,
yeah.
despite what some Catholics believe. You know, she wasn't. It even
It
it's.
directly states that, she. There's actually been some discussion amongst scholars, like, not all of them take it, granted, but, the secular scholars especially, they take it that, that even Jesus was not, they deny the virgin birth. And they what they ultimately say is because the reason why is because, like, when you date the gospels and stuff like that, well, I mean, dating is hard, but they say when you go in the correct accepted order that we do now, like, you get Paul's writings, you get Mark, Matthew, Luke, and John. um it's not until, I believe, Matthew, until you get, the virgin birth story. Mark doesn't really bring it up, and Paul never mentions it.
Well,
Paul, in
yeah,
fact,
it's mentioned in Luke. It's mentioned in um John.
well,
The
yeah, I know that, but I'm saying, like, in order of dates.
Yeah, I mean, but again, you have like this questionable validity of the earliest point. Is the earliest point of time that we can see it really, you know, is that when the earliest time it was written, or was that when it happened? Because there's still oral traditions within Christianity, just like in Judaism. Between there was a gap of time.
Yeah.
Like an entire generation before.
Well, I mean, the
It's like
earliest, yeah. I'm sorry.
several
I'm saying,
generations.
yeah. Well, the earliest sources that we have dates back to Paul, and it's not Paul either, but it's a source of Paul that Paul drew from. Um, we
So
can date,
basically the student of Paul, because
yeah,
that's what the ancients would really do. The students, when the students would take up their teacher's work and take the name of the teacher. This one of the reasons why um, every single Pope John Paul is called Pope John Paul. Their name actually changes to John Paul. Um, it doesn't matter what they're born as. When they die as Pope, they're died as Pope John Paul, whatever. You know.
and like what I was saying is the earliest sources that we got, for Jesus's life comes from Galatians, I believe 1:10 or something like that, and it has Paul saying something about how he gets this source material and his time in Jerusalem, and we can date that. If you want to be very generous to the like, if you want to be really helpful to dating it early, you get 3 years after the crucifixion. If you want to go late, you get 8 years. So we got a span of 8 years for the source that Paul did. And we know that, that the story of the resurrection and stuff had to have come early on. So, because we know that they practiced like what Paul was none about, they'd already had a creed and everything up already set for a while. So we're talking about several years, like, which is amazing when you think about like people like Alexander the Great, who didn't get a single biography written on him until like 400 years after the facts. But with Jesus, in fact, we got like at bare minimum about less than 10 years.
That's written documentation, because
Not written
I thought
documentations, but
I thought I thought my as far as biographies go, as far as the Gospels go, that was a
the
hundred
earliest
years.
source that well, Paul would be considered our earliest source of Jesus. Um, Paul came like if we just take Paul for for what he is, and the earliest time that he did it would be 25 years.
Okay,
Um,
okay, I got you.
but his source material that he went off of predates him, and we can say with certain facts, given certain lines of evidence, that it had to have been at least 8 years, at most 8 years since Jesus' crucifixion. So we have, I'm just saying that's amazing because we have far less historical knowledge on some well or more, people that we would expect more knowledge on than Jesus.
Yeah, I mean, but you also have during that time different things going on where truth was actually speaking truth was you know not only accepted but required. Like some of the things that happen nowadays, like the intellectual dishonesty and
Yeah.
trying to propagandize certain things. If it was found to be false and you were a historian, more than likely you would be put to death for it. Um,
Yeah.
because it's not just the religious aspect of telling a lie. It's the social aspect of telling a lie. It's the social
Yeah.
aspect of misleading people that the ancient people just did not like.
Well,
This
you have to take into consideration that these people were not individualists like us; they were collectivists.
Well, they weren't fully collectivist. I mean, individual. There was a I think a balance of collectivism and.
Well, they lived in honor shame culture, an honor shame culture with a collectivist, feel to it. So I mean, their society. That's why I always tell like these fundamentalists and stuff that these people like that wrote this, they lived in a completely different philosophical time period than us. And
Well, or
I tell this
it's
to
not.
some atheists too. You know, they have to take into consideration that this, the book was not written in an individualistic society. It was written in a collectivist honor shame society. And we have to take it on, we have to look at it from that aspect of it. You know, we would really do that with any other ancient work. Or hell, even works that date back only a couple hundred years, we do the same thing. So it's only fair that we take into consideration those things, if
Yeah,
that makes sense.
yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I'm still going to resist the they were collectivists, because I think there's a definite the whole free will, individual, the individual mind and stuff like that. All those theories, existed in this time. So
Oh yeah, I mean,
you know,
here's the
we
thing. But
had a
well, here's the
they had
thing.
a
Yeah,
sense of individualism, but it was also during a time where we had to work as a team or we weren't
yeah,
going to survive. So it was, I think it was less of a collectivist society. Because when you say collectivist, let's be honest, people already, I don't think that's an opera. Just the sheer number of people who demonize the term and has changed the term. I don't think that collectivist is our modern concept of collectivism. I don't think is applies. I think it's
yeah.
more.
Well, I mean, of course things change, but by collectivists we mean like they thought of the like what was considered good to them was way different than what we consider good to us. You know, because for being you, we tend to be individualist because that's the society we've been born up in. What is good for us is basically what is good for us as the individual. Back in their time, that wasn't allowed because, if you thought only good about yourself, that would be very dangerous. Like, that could kill you because you had to think of the group. You had to be willing to go without. You could not, it wasn't that you couldn't have your own personality, you couldn't be unique, but you had to be, you were who you were a part of the group.
Yeah, and which is why I think it just sounds more like teamwork. Especially knowing how harsh it was back then, and it wasn't just harsh by weather, and because we had to invent houses to protect us from the wind, to protect us from the from all that. But then you also had we also had a lot more predators
Yeah,
that all over the world that we do now. I mean, so there was more of a need to work as a team. There was more of a need to you know look after your neighbor as you're looking after yourself in order to survive, because you're only alive as long as the guy next to you to the left and right of you is. Essentially in that type of environment where every single action is about you know survival, because
yeah.
nowadays we're you know we don't have to worry about survival. Not really. I mean, even as even as a homeless person and stuff, you're still. doing. Um, you can survive.
Yeah, I mean, it's just better society than we used to. Um, so yeah, it's just my point is like we have to take into consideration history and try not to mingle our own you know personal values that we consider now into these texts.
Oh, I agree with you completely. Right, well, it is getting kind of late, and
Yeah,
we have been talking about about this for quite a long time.
yeah,
I mean, it says we started streaming 3 hours ago, so I mean, it's 1:20 now. Um, so but it was good talking to you. It was definitely good talking to you. Um, we should do it again sometime. I'm gonna try to get other. I'm gonna try to actually put this in, maybe not this exactly. I'm probably gonna cut it up and stuff like that, but and cut this part out of the video. But we'll probably get more people within the Facebook group at least. Um, but it was good talking to you, Mr. Brass. Do you have any closing any closing thoughts other than you know?
um, I just want to say that it was good talking to him. I want people to know that deism is not that much different than Christianity or Judaism in of itself. We just have a different way of looking at God and His purposes for us. And I just want to say the atheists, dogmatic atheists, that they need to lay off of us for that, and we can come try to come to even grounds. Um, Once again, I had fun talking to you, and I hope we can do this again and maybe discuss more philosophical issues.
Oh, I hope so too. I mean, but all right. Thank you very much. And next time, God bless.